Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Drew, we are live on TV tonight as well? Okay, thank you. Welcome to our special school board work session here on February 28th. If you have an agenda in front of you, the first item deals with our strategies. The second item is the link that you can find our live videos on YouTube. The third item deals with our face covering policy, and the fourth item is to call the meeting to order. So with that, I would ask everybody to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Mr. Bellingham, thank you for leading us in the pledge.
You're welcome.
This brings us to item number 5, budget reductions. This is a discussion only here tonight, and with that, I will turn this over to Superintendent Sesker to lead us in some conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. A couple things on your desk just to point out. First of all, this wonderful catalog. Anne-Marie and Matt and company put this together, so thank you very much. It's terrific. So it's our early childhood education program. If you have any questions on those, talk to Olivia, Anne-Marie, or Matt about that. The other pieces of information that we had a couple of requests for, and we did not put it on the board agenda because the agenda was already out. If we want to put it on board book after the agenda, we can certainly do that too. But you'll see that we made a revision based on some of the suggestions we heard with the reductions of the class sizes in each of the buildings. As you recall, we had a little bit larger class sizes at Lincoln, and since then we've changed that to reflect one less teacher FTE reduction. So we got everything between 17 and 24 with the numbers that we've projected for next year. The other items to take a look at are just some questions that we had from the board, more clarification for it. So the spreadsheet that you see here, it says Workforce Development Coordinator. It tells you the total cost for the district, and then funding source says General Fund, and then also remember that was also part of the 7-period day levy that we passed. Area Learning Center Director, that's ESSER. Student Success Coordinator is you can see 25% is Title III, and the other is compensatory. Compensatory revenue is the revenue we generate from the free and reduced lunches that those forms that we collect. And then Communication Coordinator is General Fund, Online Learning Coordinator, ESSER through 24. That's where they're currently being funded through. The other sheets, we thought it would be helpful. I just suggested this, and Nicole was kind enough to make some copies of the different job descriptions of each of the different coordinators, because it does get a little bit confusing with some of the coordinators and what they do. So if you have a question on some of those, particularly throughout this week, and you want to give me a holler, just give me a call, and you can just, I can go through some of those. Nicole knows these inside and out too, so feel free to give Nicole a call too. And that's all those documents are. It's just more research for you, or more information for you guys to take a look at.
Superintendent Sesker, before we just start throwing out questions from every which way, does it make sense to maybe put up on the screen for us one of the attachments, I think it's titled FY23?
It's on there.
Yeah. Oh, it's up here. Sorry, I didn't see it. Thank you. I was looking here and I wasn't looking up. Thank you. Okay.
Good timing.
Whoever did that, thank you for doing that. So.
Yeah, and again, thank you for the cabinet and the leadership, particularly the principals who helped out with this to put this new option together based on the conversations that we had last week with the school board. I don't know, Drew, if we can pull that up because the LNS, the captions, the closed captionings hide some of the details on the bottom without turning off the closed captioning. It might be challenging to do that. Regardless, I think I'm going to introduce again Scott and Nicole to come up here to talk about the phase 2 options and answer any questions that you that you have. So Scott, Nicole, you guys want to come up? Oh, great, thanks. Thanks, Drew. Oh, and Tracy. Thanks, Tracy, for coming up.
You might want to get the comfiest one possible. It could be a long night.
This is way more comfortable. That's why. Gotta lock it.
You guys all set? So I think, Nicole, if you don't mind, going through the total targets up there, and then either Scott, Tracy, or Nicole, if you guys want to go through each of the individual items and explain what that represents. And I see we got the closed captioning on the bottom again, but, so go ahead, Nicole. Or anybody, whoever you think should go.
It actually might be nice to back up to that other attachment on the agenda to show how we came up with these 3 different tiers. Maybe Scott would like to go over that real quickly first.
Is that the leadership budget brainstorming? Or the which one?
The projections.
It's up there.
There we go. Oh, thanks.
Okay, so I revised this model again to really align with what I heard you guys say last week, what we heard you guys say last week around what you had for targets. So John, you had asked for what is that 9.5%, right, coming right down to policy look like? And so the first section there across the top is $800,000 in reductions. Now, the number is slightly below that, but we just rounded that to about $800,000, okay? And you can see what that looks like, right? We would have a revenue revenue under expenses or expenses over revenue of 1.1 million. It would take our fund balance down to just under 5.6, and we would have just over 9.5 fund balance percentage. Okay, if you follow down, this is a carryover from last week, but again, we have an option for $1 million that Nicole will go over here in a little bit. And again, you can see those respective numbers that we only are $900,000 in the hole, and fund balance of 5.8, or almost 10%. And then if you roll down a little bit farther onto the bottom of the page, we have the option for 1.2. That was an option that was thrown out last week as well. So we have those numbers listed there. That would leave us at 6.3 with a 6.0 with a 10.26 fund balance. And then the last one at the bottom is the one that we had up there last week as well at $1.5 million, just for comparative purposes.
Thank you. Do you have any questions about those different numbers that Scott showed tonight?
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. So yeah, again, that was based on the feedback that we had heard from you all last week to look at what would 9.5% of our fund balance look like for, all the way up to a range of 1.2 million in reductions. So now flipping to that next attachment, the FY23 leadership budget brainstorming document, excuse me, that shows you those 3 different tiers, 800,000, 1 million, and then a $1.2 million tier as well, along with the last column, if you will, that is under board requests. So we got back together with our leadership, with a smaller leadership team last week to look over what we presented to you, and then also talk through the feedback that we had heard from you all last week. And we came up with these different tiers and then also prioritized them based on your input and then based on our leadership input and feedback as well. So in that first tier, those $800,000 pieces, the first few things are things that we feel like we would do anyways. So for instance, the mental health, position, we have $86,000 within our special education budget that we are able to shift into that budget, so we are able to realize that savings of $86,000. The next item is our ADSES increase. So our ADSES budget has a cap increase this year, and that dollar amount is $27,413. And so we know that we'll do that regardless this year. The next item is our middle school activities coordinator. Scott has worked closely with Kevin, our activities director, and going through his budget with him, they are comfortable in shifting this 11.8 into the AD budget versus into the general fund budget. And so that is another shift that we're comfortable doing. Okay. If I'm going too fast or you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So the next item on that list is a 1.0 EL para at Jefferson. Ms. Lewis is comfortable putting this position on the list for us. Then we get to a 1.0 classroom teacher at Lincoln Elementary at $70,000, also in the first column. And this falls in line with keeping our class sizes between 17 and 24 at all of our buildings. The next position on there is a 1.0 media para at the middle school. This gives us a savings of $40,000. The idea behind this is now we will no longer have a full-time staff member in our media center. However, we will have our teachers be able to bring students down to the media center if they need to work on a research project as a class or check out books as a class and so forth. Next is a 1.0 teacher at the middle school. Mr. Sage has worked this through with his schedule and is comfortable with this reduction. Next is a 2.0 teacher at the high school, 2.0 teachers at the high school. Mr. Benty has worked through working these reductions into his high school schedule for next year. Next is our 3.0 intervention teacher at Lincoln Elementary, at our elementary schools as a whole. So that reduces a 1.0 FTE at each of our 3 elementary schools. Next is a 2.0 specialist teacher position at our elementaries. And so last week, if you remember, we brought forward a 3.0 specialist reduction at our elementary schools. And what we, when we looked into this a little further, we came across the conclusion that right now we're using part of our specialist FTE to provide specialist times to our online academy. And we want to make sure that we're not cutting too deep so that we're still able to offer that to our online academy students. And so that's why we reduced it from a 3.0 FTE reduction to a 2.0 FTE. The next item now falls over into our second tier, that $1 million tier, if you will. The first item is the consolidation, thank you, of our coordinators with our ALC program and our Falcon Online coordinator at a $135,000 reduction. And then also what goes along with that is the revision of our ALC and our Falcons Online clerical support and revising those positions as well for another $25,000. Then the last thing within that tier is a 1.0 teacher at our high school. I'll take a quick drink real quick. Excuse me. Okay, so now looking at that last tier, getting to that 1.2 million, we had on there a 1.0 FTE coordinator position, and we heard a lot of input from you all last week, but we didn't feel comfortable knowing your comfort level exactly, and so we have it on here, but as a to be determined, so that we can kind of talk through that with you tonight to see what your comfort level is and what your direction is for that position.
And that references the piece of paper that we printed out in front.
Exactly, yes, thank you. And then the last thing in that tier is a 0.4 reduction to our orchestra program at the middle school for $28,000. So the last column with our board request pieces. The first item on there is looking at redesigning our middle school from our 7-period day schedule down to a 6-period day schedule. So what we learned last week about this in working with the middle school administration is building a schedule at the middle school is really intense work. And for them to be able to do that within that short amount of time was just not realistic. And so we put on there a 3.0 reduction as as a conservative number, but they would need a couple weeks to really put that together really nicely to see what the actual savings would be. So we put a 3.0 on there, but that could vary depending on how their schedule shakes out. The next two items on there were ideas that were thrown out from the board, both the dean at the middle school and the high school, those two ads that we have, at Jefferson and the middle school. Both of those positions right now are currently funded out of ESSER money, but we did add those on there just so that you could see that. And then the last item on there is the idea to reconfigure our ALC, and that also is, that conversation was tabled last year indefinitely, and so we hadn't had an opportunity to really look into that at all this year. It's a pretty intense reconfiguration that will take probably a good couple of months of time to figure out where the best place would be and how to really combine that programming in. And so we really just weren't able to come up with a good number, a good solid number to give you yet this year. It's something that we feel strongly that we're able to do. Not necessarily for next year, for the 22-23 school year, but if it's something that you're serious in having us do, we can definitely research that to make it work for the 23-24 school year.
Yep, and so if I can just fill in a couple of comments too. So as you move forward to next year and you're thinking about different items that, and kind of if you guys are going to go to the voters for an operating levy, whether an operating levy passes or fails kind of depends on obviously the voters and the turnout and things like that. But you may want to ask for this data in October 22. For the middle school redesign, for the ALC reconfiguration, or for anything else that you want, so that you have that data prior to going out to the voters for the operating levy. And whether you use that as literature for the voters to use, I think that would be great. But I think what you really need to do, instead of waiting until January, February for what we do normally in this rotation, you probably want to get this data by October. Now, it puts the principals at a little bit more stress, but you'll need that information for the operating levy. So keep that in mind as you move forward.
Because what you're saying is if the levy wouldn't pass, those would potentially be the implementations that would need to take place.
Yeah, including
reduction.
the banding of the schools, I would believe would be another option for you.
Including the what? The banding?
The banding that we did with the elementary levels. And you'll need that, like I said, I'll just say it one more time, you'll need that in October. So you have at the very least October before you start making some of those determinations.
Questions? Board members' comments? Yeah, Mr. Robichaud.
Sure, I just have a couple of points of clarification for this slow grade here. The $86,000 and the $11,000, the $97,000 is more of a savings to the general fund than it is a reduction. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, because it's confusing when it's listed as a reduction, even though you're shifting it. So.
I think it's revenue that we have from you're right, Jerry, that's correct.
Continuing savings.
Yeah.
So it's not a one-time
Right.
savings, it's a savings that possibly could last.
So where is the expenditure now?
In which piece?
The
Mental health is,
So that's coming out of my special education carryover, my federal funds.
where is it now,
Right
though?
now.
It's coming out of general
Right
fund.
now,
Right now, it's
It's in ESSER.
carryover, so I would carry over till next year.
No, what, he's saying that, how are we funding it for the 21-22 fiscal year?
This current year,
Yeah.
it's funded through the ESSER money.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not processing this correctly. Because to me, it's not a cut. Is it a savings or is it not a savings?
So I think.
Out of the general fund?
Yep, so what would happen is that shift would happen and move from ESSER to special ed in Mr. Daynard's budget. And then we would take that 86,000 and we would reallocate expenditures from the general fund into the ESSER budget.
But right now, that is not coming out of the general fund.
No,
Nope.
no, the mental health coordinator position is in the ESSER fund.
Mr. Robichaud, did you have another question?
I have to process that one first. I just have a question on the high school proposed recommendations. What does that do to the 7-period day if you go to 3 teachers?
So for the high school reductions, it doesn't impact the 7-period day. It may impact a few of the courses that are offered, but with any year, once Mr. Benty and his team get the registration numbers, some courses will be running, some courses will not be running. And so we would be able to still offer the 7-period day, making sure all pathways stay intact.
Okay, and then when is registration done, Jamie?
Registration is done. I am inputting numbers tomorrow morning.
So you know what your class sizes will be at the high school, and what classes will,
By the end of the week, I will know, have a really decent idea of what our numbers will look like, yes.
okay, thank you, thank you.
Ms. Corcoran, a question for you, or anybody that can answer this. Question on the combination of the ALC Vulcan Online Coordinator Consolidation, I think is how it's titled. Can you give us what the numbers are today or last week or whatever in both of those? And then also, is it a normal thing in school districts today where this position is combined, or is this 100% just we're doing this due to these budget reductions? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So Northfield, as an example, does have their ALC supervising and leading their online academy. So it is not a unique model that we're only looking at because of budget reductions. With that said, there are multiple ways in which we can run it. It does, because they both become alternative models to the traditional brick and mortar, 7-period day, middle school, high school, even elementary model. That was really where this became an idea as we were trying to figure out cost savings. So again, it's looking at it as it's a model that exists in other districts in addition to a cost-saving model. With that said, current numbers, I'll let you jump in there.
So Chad, the numbers, and these are as of the end of January for the FOA. We have a total of 156 unique individuals that account for about 122.7 ADM.
So that 156 down to the 122, that could be a student that's in that 156 that takes 1 or 2 hours a day in there.
Exactly.
Is that, okay.
And there's lots of those individual students that are doing that. The ALC numbers that I looked at just the other day, the average year-to-date ADM, I don't have unique individuals, is 83.
83 was the ADM.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to anybody else for questions.
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you. So I believe it might be for Nicole or Scott. So the secretary's position going from OP1 to OP2, could you describe or tell me what, so are job expectations reduced, it's reduction in pay, et cetera, or job descriptions, whatever? Could you just enlighten me on that, please?
So the thought is if we consolidate those 2 programs, we would staff it much like we do an elementary school, whereas an elementary school has 1 principal, if you will, or 1 building lead, and then they have 1 full-time OP1 or head secretary, and then 1 part-time OP2, which is more of an assistant secretary. So we would staff them as if they're 1 program running and have 1 lead secretary and then 1 assistant secretary.
So you'd still have 2 positions, but you're going to lead in a...
Yes, because right now each program has 1 full-time lead secretary in each program.
Okay, thank you. And since last week I asked, I would like to go to the middle school, the 7-period day to the 6-period day with the 3 FTEs, and I probably know as well as anybody except Mr. Sage in this room, the difficulty of establishing a middle school schedule, but I think, I personally would like to know what electives or what classes would be affected with that sort of reduction there.
So I'm happy to start that conversation, and then
I'm sorry,
Mr.
Jason,
Sage,
you
no,
was-
it's okay. Mr. Sage and I spent some time on that last week, and Mr. Sage and Mr. Young had spent significant amount of time on that as well.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. To be honest, there isn't a class, including electives, that wouldn't be impacted by the 6-period day. We would basically be going back to what is by statute required for middle school students. So that would remove a lot of our pathways at the middle school. It would remove supports and programming around AVID, around even some of our wraparound. Because when you think of how would I put that in a 6-period day, we have to get the 4 core in there, in addition to making sure that students have access to the, by statute, required electives, which would include the arts, musics, things of that nature.
So where does the common planning time fit in?
That also goes away with the 6-period day.
Yes.
Yes.
So you really can't say exactly right now, or a roundabout way, what electives would be lost, or, I know class size would go up dramatically, et cetera. I'm just trying to get a base
Yeah.
for some knowledge here.
Yep. So I think the biggest thing in the work that they did kind of tier it out as 3 options, and thinking through the lens of core first. Obviously, like I said, the removal of the CPT time, that common planning time, and then it would also make sure that we were looking at saving arts, because that is one that is by statute required. Physical education would be one that would stay, the PE and health. Outside of that, there is no mandate from the state around any of the pathways programming. So that would be world cultures, facts, as well as
Robotics.
CTE.
Robotics.
Yep, that would be part of our CTE. All of those would be potentially reduced in that process.
I'm just asking now, because I think this
Yeah.
would be very good information for the possible upcoming levy as well, just to say, these are the things that we're supporting and trying to maintain here, so
Yeah.
let's.
And again, we are more than happy to get more detailed information. I did ask them, I said, okay, we have kind of a skeleton, and if it's something you want us to investigate further, whether that's for this round or whether it's for the future, we can certainly put that together.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I follow up on Mr. Bellingham's question on that ALC FOA clerical revision of OP1 to OP2? Can that be done even if we do not combine those coordinators?
I can kind of step in. I don't think it can, because now you've got 2 separate programs, and we have an OP1 helping in both of those 2 programs. Whereas you consolidate the program, again, it's kind of, I go back to John's question, $1 is $1, it's not wasted anywhere. Somebody's going to have to pick up the slack of whatever OP1's job is missing in those 2 positions. And we're just making the assumption right now that if we have an OP1 and OP2, they're going to figure out a way to pick up that extra duty.
Okay. Can I ask Ms. Bothan, I think every month, this is year 1 of our Falcon Online Academy, just so everybody is on the same page, correct? Year 1?
Yeah.
It's likely every month, these numbers have gyrated a little bit. Based on the current staff you have today, how much bigger can the FOA get before you have to add additional staff? Does that make sense? How many more
Yeah.
students can enroll?
Well, as of today, our numbers are at 174. And that, there's about 40 or so part-time kids, and I'm still enrolling students. Our elementary, we have a little room still, but our secondary mentor teachers, I just talked to them today because one is mentoring about 97 students, and the other is mentoring 44, but also teaches our K-12 PE courses. So they are kind of getting to the max.
In Ms. Bothan, is there any point in there where paras can be effective in do that? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, from what you're saying, we're almost capped out, right? So
Right.
then in theory, take a FTE and whatever that cost is, we would then need to add X amount of more students to offset another, full-time employee in that area, right? And then we're struggling with adding costs, subtracting costs, so.
Right.
So 174 instead of the 156, but once again, that doesn't equal the
Right.
FT students, if you will. Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yep.
Other comments, questions? Well, I'll keep going if nobody wants to pipe up. Ms. Corcoran, did you say that this is prioritized amongst leadership from top down, or Ms. Yocum, did you say that, or am I wrong in that? So I guess what I'm getting at is based on cabinet, based on leadership, based on whoever had input in this, the combining of the ALC and FOA coordinator is I don't know how to say it, not a better priority, it's not right, but that ranks above one FTE teacher at the high school, and yet when somebody asked the question if we could make, I think it was Mr. Robichaud asked if the 3 FTE teacher cuts at the high school would protect the 7-period day, the answer was yes. Talk to us about interventionists at the elementary schools, because we struggle at grade level amongst these youngsters. And if anybody in this room or anywhere thinks that it got better over COVID, I think their head is in the sand based on every headline across the country. No other way, to shift any dollars there, because that's what, say it again?
Title funding.
Title funding.
Yep,
So title funding goes into general fund? No, title funding is separate.
yes. Yeah, so I can explain a little bit about why the intervention teachers, as well as kind of the funding side of it. So title funds are also generated based on our demographics and student population. There is more flexibility in that fund in how we can use those dollars. Historically, it's been used for interventionists. And if you look at our data over time, our intervention model is not impacting our students in the way that we need it to accelerate and close that gap. And so what our administrators, the teaching and learning team, our instructional coaches, as well as our teachers and interventionists have really shifted to after the pandemic is prioritizing core instruction. And within that, we've identified that our students are getting pulled out of core instruction. And so what I mean by that is their literacy block. So there's 90 minutes a day in which kids are getting direct instruction and opportunities to work in small groups and practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And during that time, students are going to an intervention teacher, or they're going to an EL teacher, or they're getting their special ed minutes. And while we want to service students to get them what they need, it's causing some disruption, and some students aren't always accessing core first. If you look at any of the research around instructional design, around making sure that we are intentionally closing the gap, we have to prioritize and protect core instruction. So over the last year and a half, the elementary principals and I have been looking at revamping, and you've heard me talk about adding this win time model. With that model, it separates what interventions currently happen during core, it moves them out of core, and it protects a 30-minute that is a targeted intervention block. WIN actually stands for what I need. So each and every student across the district in their scheduled WIN time would get exactly what they need based on the data. Moving to that model allows us to reduce the interventionists and yet still maintain high-quality targeted interventions for all of our students. It doesn't reduce EL services, it doesn't impact special education services. It takes 4 or 5 interventionists at every building, and it brings it down to 3. 3 at Jefferson, 3 at Lincoln, 3 at Roosevelt, which is still above what a typical elementary school would have. Because we do need to honor exactly what you said. We have students who are not yet at grade level, but with this new model, we feel comfortable in that reduction. And so what that does financially is it allows us to use the title funds for some of our general expenditures, our general fund expenditures, because that grant or those federal dollars have more flexibility in how we can spend them.
And just for clarification for folks out there with what the core is really focusing on the math, the science, the social studies, the English. I'm missing one. Whatever the math.
I know, I just had to
and
wait
math.
for it.
Yeah, of course, thank you. And it focuses on those core subjects, which we really think that we need to emphasize with the school district and allowing some of those interventions to happen outside of that teaching model. So that's some of the rationale for that intervention. This one actually does make a little bit more sense to me.
You've done this before, but can you walk us through what really happens so we understand?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So every grade level team would have 30 minutes of protected time. And what that means is all we do during this 30 minutes as an entire third grade team is give students what they need. So if you think about that, if we have, just for my math, if we had 4 sections of 25 kids, we have 100 kids that for this half an hour we have to decide where to go. Our intervention teachers would be part of that, perhaps additional para support, perhaps any teacher who has that half an hour free. So that means all possible instructional support would go to that half an hour block. And what we're doing is we're taking FastBridge data and we're saying which student needs what. So for our students who need enrichment, they've already met the grade level standard, they need an opportunity to add more depth or complexity in their learning, they get what they need. And they go to a room, probably with a teacher, that'd be a larger group of students, maybe 30, 35 kids even, because that tends to be a group of students that they're excited and engaged and have the prerequisite skills for whatever opportunity the teacher has for them, based on that data. Then you have your students who are doing great. The data is saying they're moving right along with where they should be at grade level. And that would be another group of students. And then what it allows, so that would be 2 different groups of kids, and you would have 2 adults with those students. Now, the remaining students and staff, now you're really able to target what they need. So if students are not yet reading at grade level, there's a variety of things that might be happening, and that's what the FastBridge data tells us. So not only do we have that data, we also have targeted interventions. So if Courtney is not yet able to read words, just basic 3-letter words, we would take a group of students who are also like Courtney, and they would get a targeted intervention to help them learn how to read CVC words, we call them, but those 3-letter words. And then we would have multiple groups going on based on that data. What's happening right now is Courtney's getting taken out of what we were calling the core literacy block, so she's missing something. So instead of getting more around what she needs, something is being missed so she can get that intervention. The intent of win time is they get what they need throughout the entire school day, and they get 30 extra minutes of exactly what they need at that time. And so you end up getting double dosed or triple dosed. Sometimes you'll hear it talked about in schools that Courtney would not be getting just one intervention, but she might be getting it 2 times a day or possibly 3 times a day based on what the data is telling us she needs. And so again, it's just a way to think differently about how we use the minutes in our day, as well as how we use the resources, because we know our teachers are our most effective resource that we have to help accelerate and close that gap.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, they're not pigeonholed in those specific areas. They go to their strengths and weaknesses, and they move throughout the different groups as they go through.
Mr. Chair, what you described right now is kind of a model of a personalized learning. And that's really what we need to strive for, more personalized learning. My question is going to come on the other side of the formula. And I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm assuming that we have maximized all possible revenue that we have available to us in this district. That being said, we know that recent report, I believe it was today, where we're at $9 billion surplus in the state of Minnesota, with the potential that that surplus could in fact bring additional funding to pre-K-12 education. And I know the discussion probably at C as well, Todd, has been, let's take a look at another 2% on the formula. So if in fact we did receive additional revenue, we could applaud, and I guess I'm asking more from an advocacy standpoint. Is that something we should be looking at as some additional revenue so that we can maximize that whole area of the interventionist? We know what's happening with students through the pandemic and, their lost learning. And if we could focus in on that kind of involvement, the personalized learning, I don't know how anybody could argue that that's not an appropriate way to fund education, so.
No, I agree with you. And I was just talking to Katie Schultz about personalized learning plans for our students that speak a second language too. I mean, it applies for all of our kids that are in the district, including our kids who need enrichment. So it really is moving in that direction. The advocate, the three things that we're really trying to push at the state capitol for more revenues. First of all, permanent funding, and that's on the general ed formula. So if we can get another 2%, that for us is between $500,000 and $600,000, and that would really certainly help. 1% is about $250,000, $300,000. The cross subsidy right now for us is $5.3 million for special ed, and just talked to Mr. Olson about this, and I talked to Rob, and he's going to bring in some pros and cons about what happens if we are able to support that cross subsidy. I'm tired of the finger pointing and the state saying it's the feds, and then the Fed said, no, we can't afford it. We'll figure it out locally, and it just goes in one vicious circle. And the third component is our EL cross subsidy. A few years ago when I first got here, we were actually making money when we had students coming in and serving them, and now it's gotten to the other point where we just haven't, the funding hasn't kept up with the inflation and the cost that it takes to educate a lot of our students. So those three pieces are our big main stakeholders for advocating at the Capitol. Of course, C is too, as you know, Jerry, equalized funding. We don't think it's fair that some of the western metro school districts' tax impact is significant lower than our taxpayers here in Faribault. For raising $1 million, it might cost somebody in Wayzata $20 a year. Well, in Faribault, it costs you $200 a year, and that's not fair. So I guess there's four. There'd be the equalization of the for levy purpose for taxes for our people who live here, the EL cross subsidy, the sped ed cross subsidy, and then also any money on that general ed formula we want to get, because that is permanent funding.
And I know that we're in a time frame where we can't wait for the legislators. I won't say, we can't wait for the legislators to make up their mind and move forward. We have to make some issues right now, but we also have to remember that if we do get additional funding, some of these things could come back that are benefiting our students, such as the intervention specialist.
You bet.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Olson.
with the cuts at the elementary, will that, very simple, will that hurt the kids? Are they getting the same education? I mean, here and there.
Go ahead. I'll start and then fill in, Tracy. I think that what we found is that some of our class sizes were actually too small this year, and so we didn't have all the examples of students within the classroom. I think that is a reflection of your classroom. If you have students that are in the classroom that can help be mentors for other students in the classroom, that's actually a benefit for our kids. So we think that, I know if you go out, I would challenge you to call any Big 9 school that you have out there. If we have 17 kids in the classroom, whether it's kindergarten, first grade, those are pretty good numbers. And so our teachers will, I think, have, again, another year of nice class sizes, even with these reductions. Remember, most of them came out of the ESSER, and we matched up those ESSER ads from last year, And we basically have decided not to include those ESSER pieces. So I think it's going to be as good, if not better, for the elementary staff next year.
I talked to Todd again, we've talked about this with the cross subsidies, is that what Todd was saying, that's very important if we are fully funded?
Yeah, and I think I think that Rob, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I asked him to bring something to us the following week about cross-subsidy and some of the pros and cons. If you don't mind, if we can wait a week on that,
Okay.
Rob will have something that will give us
But
a
instead
better
of
inspect.
concentrate on general formula, concentrate on the cross subsidies, right?
Love it, yeah.
I mean, really put pressure on them.
Yep. If
Because
that,
we've been underfunded ever since I got on the board and probably before that, right? Is that,
Well, yeah, the federal government's never fulfilled its commitment to.
well, and they never will, but then the state.
or the local taxpayers, either one, yeah.
But I think, and I don't want to not support what you're saying, but I think the issue in front of us is we have to make budget reductions, and we don't have any of those other
No.
sources of revenues coming
No.
for certainty,
No.
right? We're going to have to make budget reductions.
Although I think after next week, when we do present some of that information, it would be stuff that you guys can bring to the legislatures to tell them that this is why we need it. So,
Can we move on to the specialists? You had said that we went from 3.0 to 2.0 because the specialists are also teaching in the online. Can you just talk us through again how we have 3 elementary schools and there are four specials? Like how do you, we're still at the point where if we approve this, it's going to go back to the elementary schools and they'll come up with a plan?
Yes, so there's a couple ideas on the table. So right now it's a 5-day rotation. The easiest and probably the less, disruptive, just in the sense for all involved, would be just moving to a 4-day rotation as compared to a 5-day. We're committed to ensuring that students still have 2 days of PE. That is a non-negotiable for us, regardless of what model we design. Mr. Palmer also shared that years ago, there was a 10-day rotation model. So again, it's not something that any of our elementary principals or myself said, oh, we can't do this. Like, we found it to be very feasible, especially moving from a 3.0 reduction to a 2.0 reduction.
So does the reducing to a 4-day rotation mean cutting a special or cutting the frequency with which they go to all the specials?
So it would turn into the 2-day for sure, and then we have, again, the statute around the arts, so we'd want to make sure that is there, and then we also we're looking at kind of redesigning what media would be and incorporating more of those STEAM components as compared to just going and checking out books. As we know, students have access to a lot of books in their classrooms now, and so really trying to shift away from that and re-envision what that might be through this opportunity.
Okay, so the arts is music and visual
Music,
arts?
yes.
So we really are in public schools moving away from having like traditional librarians and media specialists. We've been talking about this for several years now. I know Mr. Casper really cared about it when I first was coming onto the board. And is that a trend, like Mr. Wolf asked about the other one, is that a trend that we're seeing in public schools? It's sad, it's hard to talk about, but is that a trend that we're seeing in public schools?
Yeah, I would say as you look at the various Big Nine partners, as you look at within the metro area, we're really seeing that need for innovation around technology. We know the importance of students and those 21st century skills, being able to work together, being able to problem solve, being able to be critical thinkers, and so it's an opportunity just to think differently. In addition to, as we were talking about with reading, writing, speaking, and listening, our students are getting a lot of access to books. And again, the books don't go away, they're still there. And so if a teacher wants to go down and you are then utilizing the media space as a space to get more books, to be able to just even have a quiet space that's outside of the classroom, that could still be an option.
Can you remind me a little bit, when we talk about these kinds of changes, the interventionists, the specialist teachers, some of them have been here for a long time. So when we talk about cuts to people who have specialized jobs in our district, can you remind us sort of how that works in the system?
Nicole, maybe you can. help with that.
So, yes, so for our interventionists, right now, they are all included in our elementary education category within their seniority and their license as well. So they're licensed to teach K-6, for the most part, elementary ed. So,
All 14 to 15 of them?
yes. And so,
So there's no brand newbies who've only been here for 1 year and are interventionists?
I don't believe so, no. Mm-mm. No, so the way, there's a lot of pieces that go into it, along with like retirements and resignations and just people moving to different jobs within the district as well. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but in terms of the interventionists, they would have rights to some sort of an elementary ed position, along with some other ones as well, because some of them have a reading license and they have other license, so they have rights to other positions within the district. Our specialists are the ones that have more of a focused license, if you will, and so with the reductions in that area, we would be looking at taking advantage of retirements potentially, which is helpful as well, or helpful in this situation. 'Cause we do have 2 people that have reached out and indicated that they're interested in retiring. We also have a few people that would be able to move into other positions also, depending on where all of these reductions shake out.
So in the case of the interventionists, the trickle down is sort of non-tenured teachers. And in terms of the specialists, it would be sort of different depending on who it was and how it, because they're more specialists. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Ms. Corcoran, if I could go back to the WIN, I think it's very intriguing, as Dr. Robichaud said, the specialized learning, but so the interventionists are in what grade level? Are they first, second, third grade only?
No, our current model, we have interventionists per grade level and a couple that are sharing a grade level. At Roosevelt, I know we have a K-1 interventionist, but for the most part, we have interventionists that are supporting no more than 2 grade levels this year.
Thank you. And then, so in thinking about the WIN program, and I think I mentioned a week ago with the collection of data and all this, when is that going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, you have all this planning and individualized grouping, et cetera. How do you, and I know I'm getting down in the weeds maybe too far here, but because I'm concerned about reducing the interventionists if we're really putting a load on teacher, other interventionists, whatever, that for all these students needs to be met. So if you could just explain that, please.
Sure, yeah, so first of all, I think our PLCs are where that work is going to happen. Our PLCs are at least 2, if not 3 Wednesdays after school, monthly. You wouldn't be moving these groups of students more than every 4 to 6 weeks. So once a month for this data collection. Also keep in mind that when you are looking at the data, you're not starting from scratch. You are taking students and their daily performance, you're taking the data, and you're just responding with small changes here and there based on what students need at any given time. So it's not, and having used this model as a teacher, I would say once we got familiar with the process, we would be able to resort and get students into groups based on what they need in about 20 minutes. So when you think about there's an hour, 2 times a month, guaranteed PLC time, that would be 120 minutes. If 20 minutes, again, down the road when we get good at it, if 20 minutes is just sorting, and then even saying another 20 to 30 minutes is about what resources do we need to be able to teach and or support in these different areas. And then the other piece that I'll just add to the conversation are leadership teams. So Jessica, Sean, myself, and then our Lincoln Literacy coach are going up to Burnsville because they are a district that utilizes this model at their elementary, and we're going to go do some site visits tomorrow and actually watch a team and see how do they group data so we can get more of a real pulse on how much time will that actually take. But yeah, that would be the work of the PLC. as we get started, I can easily see our principals making time, whether it's directly supporting on a time that teachers determine. So for some teachers, that might be a half an hour before school that they want to work on their data analysis, and/or during a staff meeting when we get started. So there's a lot of places that it can live. But again, the idea being that it's done collaboratively as a team.
So I'll just throw something else in your professional opinion, because I'm looking at down the road. So would WIN work better with a grade banded school where you have all third graders? That's what I connected right here. I mean, would it work, you had grades 3 through 5 in a building and you could just piece that in, correct?
From a teaching and learning standpoint, grade banding in these conversations offers a lot of innovative opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Superintendent Sesker, I don't know if you have the Phase 2 template in front of you, where it says the 800,000, the 1 million, the 1.2, thank you. Board requests. Is it safe to say that leadership does not support a reduction of changing the middle school from 7th period to 6th period based on that 210? Is it safe to say that leadership does not support a reduction of the dean at Jefferson Elementary, which is ESSER funded next year? We didn't fill it this year, right? And is it safe to say that leadership does not support a reduction of a dean at the middle school, which is funded by ESSER funds this year and presumably into next year? Is that safe to say because it's board request and it's not included in the 800 or the 1 million or the 1.2 million?
That is correct. Yep, those were the lowest on the priority list.
Okay. And just to leadership, yourself, Superintendent Sesker, or anybody at the table, or anybody else that wants to answer, if we had to choose one or the other based on the rankings, if you will, leadership would tell us that we should reduce 3.0 intervention teachers before we would reduce 2.0 specialist teachers,
Yes.
both at the elementary school.
Yep.
Okay. This is where I'm deferring to all of you. You're the professionals, I'm not. But I see 3.0 versus 2.0, and I understand what the interventionists were doing or do. So thank you. Mr.
Chair,
Robshaw.
thank you. You know, the old adage about deja vu all over again. We've gone through this over and over for many years. One of the things that I didn't see is, and I'd like to just know, what kind of discussion was there held about other positions, operational, custodial, those kinds of positions? And then coming again from an old school, where are we with any curriculum review cycle that may be in the works, and is that something that was looked at? So just for information purposes, what other areas were looked at beyond this list that's up here now?
Yeah, good question. You know, we looked at all of those different areas. We included even food service. We looked at shifting money from food service, but we did that a couple years ago and got our hands slapped, so there wasn't really much we could do there. Custodians, if you look at our square footage, and now we've added more square footage up at Roosevelt. We added square footage here, and we didn't add any custodians. Kane is pretty stretched with what he has right now, so that really didn't make much sense. The paraprofessionals, a lot of those are special education paraprofessionals, and those are, you know, certain funds that we have. I was just, all joking aside, most of the reductions that we're looking at are covered in different grant areas, or ESSER funds, or ADSIS, or closed grant, or Anne Marie's $5 bazillion that she secured for us in revenues. And it's just too bad that the state doesn't step up and help us support some of these things. It's just really difficult to try to find a place where we can reduce general fund dollars because of the lack of funding from the state of Minnesota and from the federal government. So I don't know if you want to add that, Scott. We looked at transportation too. In fact, transportation is one of the reductions we made through the
ESSER fund.
through the ESSER piece of it. Other areas, Scott, that we looked at?
Yeah, we looked at
You want, grab the mic too, yep.
Sorry. So we went through all the unrestricted and restricted buckets of money to see if we could move here and move there, and we did do a lot of that. You know, technology has taken on an individual. We're moving some middle school staff into different buckets, clerical staff getting moved into operating capital, and all the different things that we really could do to free up all the different kind of braided funding that we could do and still be in compliance.
I think the hard part is, of course, if you take something away, like if you put more people in operating capital, or you use LTFM to support, again, those are restricted funds, you're going to run out of funds. It would be sure nice to have the general fund support those, but we know the reality.
Mr. Chair, and again, I asked that question because I have no doubt that that kind of research was done in looking at how can you fine tune the budget. So
Yep.
I appreciate the response very much. Thank you. There's no doubt that that was painstakingly looked at over the course of the several weeks.
Can we talk a little bit more about the 2 dean positions that are funded in the ESSER, through the ESSER money?
Sure.
I know we filled the dean at the middle school earlier this year, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how that's going in terms of retaining for next year, because it seems like we are open to the idea of moving something into the ESSER money. I understand that if we were to, anything that is funded by ESSER, that will be an issue for us a year from now or 2 years from now, right? So if we move money around, we're creating another issue that'll happen a year from now.
And you already have one issue from last year.
Right, and we talked about that last week when we were talking about this. What I don't really understand is it felt like the Jefferson position was urgent at a specific time, and it's hard for me to understand why we would keep that position. I didn't see Jessica here, but I don't know if one of you could talk on behalf, because that seems to me like low-hanging fruit if it never got filled, and we can look at other solutions for how to support Jefferson next year.
Yeah, so it was not, it wasn't filled because we didn't need it. I still think we
Right,
needed
I
it. It
know.
was filled because of, we did not want to make a larger negative impact on another elementary school as a result of moving a very good teacher from their position into this position. So I would say this year, if we had it, it would have actually been a very positive thing for the school.
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I absolutely know that. I didn't mean to imply anything.
No, I'm not.
other
I
than that.
just
Okay.
needed to explain that piece. The second piece is for next year, based on Jessica's, and Jessica was visited with you guys too, and she obviously was in that conversation for the priorities. We still think that we can use that or utilize that position to help make a difference for some of the kids who are experiencing some pretty big behavior issues. I don't know, Tracy, do you want to add to that piece with Jessica or your conversation you had?
Yeah, I think you did a good job summarizing. Again, the hope was to have that position filled this year. That didn't pan out for a variety of reasons, but Jessica is still committed to that as an area to support for next year. And her intent around that is really to free her up as an instructional leader so that she is not pulled in many different directions responding to various behaviors of some of our students.
So we don't think the need is going to go away, and we had earmarked ESSER dollars for it, so we want to stick with earmarking the ESSER dollars for it, basically.
I think that's wise, yeah.
And same thing with the middle school dean?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a couple shifts up there that I'm pretty nervous about already, so, yep.
Over there, yeah. Yeah, stick with the middle school dean, he
Yeah.
says, from the back of the room.
Mr. Sage has a microphone. Feel free to-
I wouldn't add a whole lot to it, but I would encourage anyone. Anyone can come to the middle school at any point in time and you will feel the impact that Mr. Salter is making on the building. We had some behavior concerns, and so he's been able to work on those throughout the entire building. But with that has come this tremendous opportunity for him to build relationships with both our students and staff, which ultimately results in a better building culture and climate. So he's been tremendous and has made a monumental impact on the building.
Yeah, I just got to put one more. I've been here 11 years, and I've seen the ebb and flow. When the middle school had a dean of students, the stress at the middle school went down dramatically. I remember those years when we were talking about adding it or not adding it, then we didn't add it, and then it went way up. So there's actually pretty good data to show that when we added that position, and I couldn't agree with you more. I walked down there, and I think he's doing a tremendous job. It does help with the learning. Now, I know it's part of the financial pieces that you have to weigh, but our middle school is really doing well, and I just hate to see that piece go. Again, that could be something that maybe you have to add. Well, by the way, it's ESSER anyway, so it's going to go away either next year or the year after. So you'd have to figure out a way to replace that if it's something that you believe is beneficial.
Ms. Steves, any questions or comments from you?
I think my questions have been answered and asked by everyone else. So just looking, and I hate to ask this question out loud, but administrative cuts. I think it is compelling in our community as we go out for an operating levy to show that we're making cuts in all places. I mean, everything on here is painful.
There was one question you had that I asked Scott to do a little research about what's our pain threshold before it gets really bad. And I think that was a really good question. And Scott, you want to try to address that?
Well, excuse me. I believe the question was, how bad do things have to get or something. It was several hours ago that Todd asked, statutory operating debt occurs at 2.5%. And if you look at the model that I had, I'm just trying to bring it back up here.
It'd be the previous one, Drew.
You said 2.5%?
2.5%. So if you look at the model where we cut just $800,000, right? So let's we get pretty close to that at the end of fiscal year '24.
That's if you cut 800,000 this year and you cut 0 next year?
Right. And assuming nothing from the state, right? Which, we'll probably get something from the state, but, we don't really know what. The other piece that comes along with that is, while we might not be in statutory operating debt, the ability to cash flow and pay all of our debt and our principal and debt payments become much more difficult, if not impossible, without short-term borrowing.
One thing we haven't spoken at all about this year is OPEB. Is there anything that can be done there, like in past years, or no? What is that like?
That's a really good question. There's one piece that we didn't explore, and I'm not sure what our liability is for OPEB for this next year.
So the number is about just south of $200,000, our implicit rate.
Yeah, implicit rate, yeah.
The implicit rate is what you're looking at. So we could dip into the implicit rate as well.
Yeah.
Excuse me, the $200,000 is for this year. I don't know what next year's number is. But it's going to be somewhat in the ballpark, right?
Put you on the spot here, Scott. Thanks for asking that question, Chad. Do you know what's in our savings account for OPEB right now? Do you remember what that is?
Yeah. So we have a balance of real close to $2.5 million sitting in Fund 45 right now. Last year we did really well in terms of market gain on our investments, where we actually went ahead, right, with paying all of our responsibilities and the implicit rate as well. This year the market hasn't been as great, and if I were to look at that today, we might be backward by the same amount, if not more, right? That's kind of a rough thing too. If we don't do well in our investments and then we take out money for implicit rate, yeah, we'll have plenty of money. Don't get me wrong. It won't hurt us in the short term, but it might hurt us in the long term.
Maybe if you could get a more specific number and any thoughts on that for next week, or supply that with us throughout the course of the week, and we can discuss that a little more in terms of factual next week, that would be good.
How do people feel about taking that fund out of? OPEB is the post-retirement benefits, so if a teacher or staff, doesn't have to be a teacher, if a staff member retires, then there's a an actuary number that comes out. We're still quite a bit short of whatever that actuary number is. I think it's probably close to 7 million. We have to, I mean, obviously it'd be nice to make that money up. One side, I've never seen a school district go bankrupt. On the other side, it would be nice to save that money up as much as you possibly could. But when you get in tough situations like this, sometimes it's not a bad idea to take a look at that dollar amount and figure out if there's something in there that you guys really, really want to keep that we could use to offset.
We can't levy for that anymore, can we?
No.
No. Okay.
Superintendent Sesker, can you, or leadership, walk me through a little bit more of why the combination of and I apologize because we have some people sitting in here and we're talking about your jobs, and I recognize that's a really hard thing for you to be sitting here and having us talk about your job, so I apologize in advance. I wish we weren't having to have this discussion. Superintendent Sesker or leadership, can you walk me through a little more of why you would prioritize the combination of the ALC FOA coordinator, and obviously with that goes the clerical revision? Why is that above the 1.0 FTE teacher at the high school, so essentially the third teacher at the high school, when that third teacher from previous accounts will not impact the 7-period day or the Pathways program? Or maybe Mr. Benty wants to answer that, or whoever. I'm just looking for a little clarity if you can there. Anybody?
Jamie, do you want to? I think it directly impacts you.
So if I understand your question right, you want to know why we looked at combining the two coordinators versus over top of some other pieces, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you look on that chart, if I understand it correctly, it's prioritized from top down, right? So every time if you made a lesser reduction, the one on the bottom would go away, right? That's you don't want to do that one every time you keep moving to the left. So if I read that correctly, and I'm looking in column 1.0 million, if you will, I see the 1.0 ALC FOA coordinator consolidation of 135,000 right below. That's 25,000 of the combination of the clerical revision of the OP1 to OP2. That is ranked higher than the 1.0 FTE teacher at the high school. And I would, if I'm reading this correctly, that if you had to choose between the combination of those coordinator positions and the teacher based on this, you would make that combination before you would eliminate that third teacher. Is that correct? Because that's the way I'm reading it. Maybe I'm understanding it incorrectly.
That was not the way that it was intended when we put it together. That the rankings from top to bottom within those columns is not a ranking.
Okay, sorry, I thought I understood.
The rankings from column to column is a ranking.
Oh, I get that. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought from top down it was.
No.
That's the way you understood it?
Yeah, that's the way I understood it too.
Okay.
Do you want to clarify that, Nicole, a little bit?
So let's get all on the same page and we'll get something done.
So, excuse me, so yes, and it is prioritized within each category as well. So looking at the coordinator versus the teacher, when we looked back at our ESSER cuts, because we used that as well to help drive this conversation, we already are cutting 2.0 from the high school and the ALC. Then on the 800,000 priority list, if you will, we're cutting another 2.0 from the high school. And so we had to weigh out really how many programs do we want to affect at the high school, how much do we want class sizes to go up before we look at doing something within a reconfiguration of administration. Because all these are hard, and all these are affecting students directly. Teachers and paras are directly affecting students. You know, a coordinator is also affecting students, but is once removed, if you will. And so that's really kind of where our justification came from. We are already doing or recommending a 4.0 FTE teacher cut at the high school and the ALC, and so we were trying to protect it a little bit more at another level.
I think you can even categorize that. It's actually a best guess. I mean, I don't know how you prioritize one position
Yeah,
over
no,
the
I
other. It's
get
it's just
it.
a best guess, and it's the best that they've done. Yeah.
Mr. Benty, today you oversee the coordinator of the ALC, is that correct, or am I wrong on that?
That is correct, yes.
If this position is combined, how does that fall? What happens then?
Oh, great question.
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far. I'm assuming that the supervision would either be the principal, it makes sense, or the curriculum, or the superintendent would take that role. We'd have to have that discussion to see who gets to do the evals and
I mean, I
support the
understand
program.
all of these plates are full, and it
Yep.
becomes a question of can they become more full, or what falls off the plate and doesn't get done in a satisfactory way, right? There's only so much that can be done. Mr. Bellingham, you got a question or comment? Go ahead.
Lots of them, but I don't know if it's this time I want to make them or not, but depends on where you want to go with it, so.
No, I'm good. I'm good for now. Thanks.
I don't know if we're into the time, fellow board members, if we need to get down to brass tacks and say what we're thinking of or whatever, but if that's the case, Mr. Chair, then I will. Obviously, I have supported using the fund balance as much as possible. That's not real high category with our finance people. I understand that, but again, rainy day fund, and we're not in a rainy day. I've made that statement before. It's a lot worse than that. I've gone through these, and I try and prioritize to keep these cuts away, reductions away as much as possible with kids and the programs that are important. And first one I'll address is the combination of the ALC and the online academy coordinator positions. As I stated a week ago, I believe those are our two rock stars right now. If we go back a year, with the ALC, we gave them a year or so and said, let's reorganize whatever we have. They've done a fabulous job. Their numbers are going to continue to go up in the spring like we saw last year as well, with kids now in the second semester, might be struggling in some classes. Their enrollment will go up as well. That I hear nothing but accolades coming out of the ALC, and I know that plate is full with the coordinator and the secretarial help down there, et cetera, as well as the staff. Also, the online academy, I think that was a real savior this year as far as numbers, being able to draw kids in from outside of the district and provide additional opportunities for our kids who go here, and maybe online learning, they do better with that, or this particular situation. I think it's a gem. They're both funded by ESSER, and I would like to see it remain. We can, obviously, it will be re-examined again in another year, but when you have two programs that just started and those coordinators have just got in there and developed and are working, it's time to let them go to keep working. And thank you, both coordinators and the staff there for what you do and how it's going. So that's the one for me that is totally off the plate there, and I could go on with all of these, but I'm just advocating, and I know it looks 9.53% fund balance. That's a board policy. What if the board policy were to change to 8? What if we take a look at some of that? And I think MSBA, their policy is they want 14 or 15% or 17% fund balance, and I don't know how that was ever.
Those are the auditors.
Okay, yeah, okay, what's possible there. So I think in looking at this list, and I know more information is coming, but I would strongly advocate, even though I'm not comfortable with I don't know where I'm at yet with the interventionists, but, because that is a big number as well too, but I would advocate going there, and it gives us the fall, it gives us the rest of this year, summer and fall to get our act together and really advocate for that levy, get this stuff coming in. It gives us time to see what money is going to come from the state of this surplus and on the fund. I just think it gives us some time to breathe a little bit and still provide these programs what's best to engage our kids.
Thank you, Mr. Bellingham. Mr. Olson.
Yeah, John mentioned something, the history when I first got on the board, fund balance was 8%. Yeah, it was 8, and then whenever, then they changed it to have a little bit more cushion.
Okay.
I think it was a time where the state was borrowing, what, 50, 60% from us, and our cash flow, in fact, I think we had to borrow money, if I remember correctly.
When we actually, at that time, you guys had already built the fund balance, so we got really, really close. That was my first couple of years when they changed that law to 60/40, whatever it was. I think we're down to like, I mean, it was like $30,000 we had in our bank account when we were cutting checks for payments, but then we were able to build that back up once they gave it back to us. But we were close.
And then when you talk 1.0 or 3 point, is that like one whole person or is it partial? Like 0.5 over here, then you add it together, it's 1 or something? Is it actually, when you say 1.0, it's actually one person, or is it combination?
I believe these are all one person. There might be some 6/5 or like 0.2s of people sprinkled in there, but I think that those were all ESSER reductions, and I believe these are all full people.
So like, if I could just explain, we've hired some of our staff to cover some classrooms. So they're really working 1.2, the working extra. So we've reduced it back to 1.0.
Then a comment on the, I believe we had some emails on the orchestra. There's some concern there. Could somebody explain that?
Yeah, we've had some, actually, I think, if Joe, feel free to chime in, but I got some concerns about that too. And if you can see, that's on the $1.2 million reduction for suggestions. And we believe we can still fill the orchestra and some of the music requirements given with that reduction. But it's certainly a 0.4 less person if we decided to go with column number 3.
Correct me if I'm wrong, so we have orchestra teacher, then this person will work 0.6?
Yes.
Then
if they decide, if they want to stay at 0.6.
if they want to stay.
Right.
And you could go someplace else for a 1.0.
Correct.
Then we've lost.
A good orchestra person.
Is that smart?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of those reductions that we've put out there.
Because somebody mentioned, I don't know if Chad or John, each one of these is a person.
Yep.
That's why I asked, is it 1.0, is that a person? And I just hate letting people go. I mean, it just, somebody has to sign these letters saying you're out of a job. And that's the worst thing of a board member to do. And it just, it's, to lose a job. It just, I just can't see that. I know there's cuts coming, but still.
Mr. Olson, they're all painful.
What? What's that?
They're all painful.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah.
Superintendent Sesker, question for you, and I'm not endorsing this, but if you looked at the state average of board policies for a fund balance, is 9.5 on par? Is that low? Is that high? Obviously, the auditor's at 15.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious how we are for state average and also our Big 9 peers, just because we compare ourselves to the Big 9 on every other thing we talk about. So do you have any idea on that information?
If I had to, and again, this is just from my conversations with the other superintendents in the area, I would say the majority of them are anywhere between 10 and 20% fund balance at this point. Some of them are going down this next year, so that may have an impact. But I think for the most part, in the Big 9 anyways, their fund balance are anywhere between 10 and 20.
That healthy?
Yep. I can't think of a school, right, unless you can think of, Scott, I can't think of a school that's even close to SOD right now.
Our neighbor to the east was close if they did not pass a levy, correct? But they passed a levy.
That's correct. Well, yeah.
Now, that's not a Big 9 neighbor, but.
No, they were already in SOD.
They were.
Yep. And they passed both levies.
Okay.
Well, and Mr. Chair, some of us in this room did teach and negotiate and live through the SOD back in the 90s, early, mid-90s, and that was not a fun thing, but we made it through and we still, still did, but it's nowhere we want to go. But I don't think by using the fund balance that we will get there, that will happen. There's a lot of pieces to fall into place, but again, my 2 cents.
Okay, so forgive me, this probably sounds really dumb. The bolded numbers at the bottom of the leadership budget brainstorm, I'm looking specifically at the 55,000. So just piggybacking off of Mr. Bellingham's comments, if we applied that extra 55,000 to throwing this out there, the 135, could we take the additional 85,000 from the general fund? Does that make sense?
Sorry, where's your 135? Is that the
That's the
1.0 ALC FOA coordinator?
Mhm.
But I believe you also need to take the 25 as well, right? Because those only happen and they're
Yeah.
connected, correct?
Yeah.
So essentially, you'd be looking at a 160 number, 135 plus 25 to get to 160 or no?
Does that make any sense?
So I think what Cassie is saying is if we remove the 135 number from the 1,055,000, we'd be left with $920,000. And could we take that from the general fund? It would just mean that your cuts are at 920 and instead of $1 million, so.
But you'd also have to reduce another 25,000, right? Because you can't go from an OP1 to OP2 if you're going to save that, correct?
Yeah, because you have two separate schools again, and you're going to need probably an OP1. I mean, we can look at that again, but
Right?
Yeah.
is the ALC going to get the OP2, or is Faribault Online Academy going to get the OP2?
And it would all depend on where we house them
Yeah.
and some different things.
So let me look at it slightly differently for you. And this is where I wanted to get to the prioritization of this, is basically, if you look at the difference between that 800 and 1 million, right, there's three positions. The combination of the coordinator, the OP1 to OP2, which is the clerical revision, and then also the 1.0 teacher at the high school. If you took out of that 1 million, 160,000, right, because you're combining those two, and you left in there the 70,000, instead of the 155, you'd be taking out 90,000, and you're, ballpark around $965,000,
That's correct.
right?
Yep,
My calculator still works?
that's right.
The other thing, just to keep in mind, is these numbers that we have in here for FTEs are an estimate. So just keep that in mind. Like, a teacher doesn't always cost $70,000. Sometimes some teachers cost $85,000, $100,000, and some of them cost $60,000. So there's a little bit of fluctuation in how much things will actually cost, and we can't get to that exact number until we know who's going to be affected by the cuts.
Cassie, sorry, I'll let you go back and keep working on your thoughts.
So the quick answer is yes. It's just that you're going to be making, obviously, you're going to be making a larger impact on the fund balance. You're going to be taking more money.
You're not
out
all
of
the way down to 800, but you're still not at the 1 million.
Yep.
You're in between, right?
So instead of being at 9.5%, you might be at 10% fund balance.
Mr. Bellingham? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Robichaud?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Ms. Steves?
It's just mud in here right now, sorry.
If I take a look at that list, and just because we're responsible for good financial management, what of that list is covered? I'm assuming that anything in the elementary is really some way related to enrollment decline at the elementary. So even if we didn't have to make millions of dollars in cuts, we would be doing that anyway because we're not going to have the same number of students. And then this list that was given out tonight for F23, that's what the class sizes would be if we make those reductions.
That's correct.
So basically, 2 elementary specialists, classroom teacher at Lincoln, those are really related to declining enrollment.
Superintendent Sesser, what happens if we do make, 800,000 in reductions or slightly more, whatever that shakes out to be? The projection is slightly more than the 9.5%. Obviously, every year we usually get some type of ads throughout the course of the year, which really will then handcuff us, that we can't make those. And we all know that our enrollment estimates are just that, estimates, the very, very best of complex projections. It's not somebody throwing a dart, right? I mean, you're running many, many models that are usually in the ballpark, but sometimes we're over by 40 and sometimes we're under by 40. If our fund balance does go under 9.5%, I have not been on the board where it's happened. What happens in that case? Is that something, what happens? I mean, our accountants don't come in and slap us on the wrist. We don't get fined or anything like that. That's just a policy that we then acknowledge that we're out of.
Nope, there's a little bit more to that.
There is, okay, tell us about it. What happens?
So you know what AAA bonding rating, those bond ratings are?
Yep.
Those A+ bond ratings could go down to A- or B+. So if you want to go out and you want to pass a big capital project, then your rates could increase and cost taxpayers more money.
So for people that don't understand that, our debt issuance costs could go up.
That's correct.
That's what that means. But in terms of an immediate impact, there's no punitive dollar penalty or anything of that nature.
No, you could always change the policy. There are steps within the policy, and we always want to follow policy.
Yes.
And I think I don't remember what they are right offhand, but it's in your, if you look it up, it's online. Kathy does a great job of organizing it. Just ask her where that is. But yeah, there are certain steps that ask the district to do. I'm assuming that came out of the SOD process from a few years back. At one point, I think there was something that says you need to go out for a levy within that language.
So Mr. Bellingham kind of started us on a number conversation, if you will. Mr. Bellingham, I just want to make sure that this is correct. You're closer to the 800,000 number than anything, is that correct or no?
Locked in.
Locked in on the 800, okay. And I don't want to.
You know where I stand.
I don't want to, if there's other questions about any specific spots, please make sure you ask them. I know, one, we're going to get some feedback on the OPEB in a more factual way, if you will. Other board members, any other questions or thoughts before we kind of start taking the temperature, if you will, of a dollar amount? Mr. Robichaud.
That's just one question. The 1.0 coordinator to be determined. What's the predetermined? Has that been resolved?
This is the list, right?
Yeah, so you have the list in front of you.
Right.
That was requested. As a leadership team, we didn't feel comfortable identifying what that coordinator position was.
You were not comfortable identifying that?
I think we did have, just so you know from last time, Jerry, for the priorities, we did have the workforce development coordinator on there. And then we looked at the ALC and the online learning piece, and then also the student success coordinator last time around.
Right.
And we couldn't really get an agreement on it. So we thought we'd bring it back to you guys to see if there's a consensus on one of those.
So you want the board to make the decision?
Well, we can make the recommendation if you want us to. We just don't want to come back next week and have the same discussion where it's not going to work.
And Mr. Robichaud, I want to also, if this is correct, please let me know, and if I'm wrong, let me know. But those, the workforce development coordinator, the student success coordinator, and the combination of the ALC coordinator with the FOA coordinator, those were all part of a $1.5 million budget reduction, correct? And when we spoke about it last, bless you if that was somebody, bless you. When we spoke about it last Monday night, the board was not comfortable at 1.5, so hence they're not on there now. So,
Right.
yeah.
I was listening to the board online.
Yeah.
I might have taken just a short little nap.
You took a short little break.
But I just want to, don't get me wrong, if the board wants us to go to the $1.2 million, then we'd probably bring back a proposal for you for next week to take a look at. Yep.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
I'm not hearing a loud cry for the $1.2 million from any of us. Am I missing the tenor of the room here? It doesn't sound like we have really the appetite, what's the word?
Appetite?
Appetite for that,
Or tolerance?
tolerance for that.
Ms. Cavalier, do you have a number you're more in tune with, if you will?
I would really like to meet the $1 million cut, but I'm not comfortable with the coordinator consolidation. So I'm feeling a little stuck.
Ms. Steves?
I would agree with Ms. Cavalier.
Mr. Olson?
I would agree with the 1 million, but I would add to that column the 1 point FTE coordinator to be determined.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you said the 1 million
Right.
plus the addition of the 1.0 FTE coordinator, so which it would really get us up to about take the number at the bottom, I guess, 1,055,000. It would get us close to just under 1.2 million, and get us to 1.19 million. If I take the 1,055,000 plus 135, gets us to 1.19. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Olson?
No, then I think you would take off the FOA and the ALC.
Are you saying you'd take that?
Oh, yeah, right, it's the,
You'd like to remove that?
right, I mean, what John believes in.
You want to swap the coordinator change
Right, yeah.
for a TBD instead of the consolidation.
Yeah.
Or is it a coordinator or an administrative position? What, I don't, a coordinator from this sheet, is that what you're saying?
Yes, from the sheet.
Okay. Mr. Robichaud?
I'm more inclined to take a look at the $800,000 and coming at the standpoint of, maybe I'm the eternal optimist that I think our legislators are going to look at education, give us some additional funding. I'm not real optimistic about the cross subsidy, but I am optimistic about some additional funding on the formula, and probably some Mickey Mouse and other stuff around. So I would take a look at the $800,000, knowing that we probably will have some additional revenue coming in.
I just want to make sure too that, because we haven't visited this yet, that our deficit is showing 1.9 million for
Right, that's
next
right,
year.
right.
That's our total deficit that we're showing. So when we have to make, I mean, obviously there's not going to be, I'm optimistic that we're going to get more money. I agree with you. But to make up that difference is going to be a large chunk of money. And I also agree with you. I don't know if, I want the cross-subsidy thing to be fixed, but I'm not real optimistic about that. Your best bet for new revenue is an operating levy next fall. So however you want to figure that in your head, whatever differences you're making right now, that's the dollars you're going to have to add in addition to the renewal of the levy next fall. So, which is not a bad thing. And there are some good options that Ehlers came down here and talked about, and I think that the technology levy is a really, really good idea with a minimal tax impact to taxpayers to help free up some of those general fund dollars.
So what I'm hearing is somewhere between that 800 and $1 million. Sounds like there's slight degrees of different support for this position or that position. It certainly sounds like the board would like to see that ALC FOA coordinator consolidation taken off the table is what I'm hearing. So I think that's some feedback for administration. Once again, the OPEB, what that looks like factually, Personally, I would like to see us somewhere between the 800 and 1 million, and I only say that because it just gives us a little bit better cushion, just because, once again, I'm certain there will be an ad or two coming throughout the course of the year, but this just tells us that we are still not balanced in our budget, right? And so if a levy does not pass in the fall, this board is potentially passing on a gaping wound to the next board. And there's 4 positions open. And that could be really, really, really painful of what that looks like. And that's the reality. And I'm not a big fan of passing something like that on to the next board. With that said, I'll pledge to do everything I can possibly do to increase our local revenue amongst our local tax base and help show why it's important for our students, for our schools, for our community. But I'm somewhere between that 800 and 1 million. So, yes, Mr. Olson.
Yeah, again, I know it's in the future, but still, that cross-subsidy. It's
We'll
been,
try.
that's the elephant in the room. It just, it's too big, let's just forget. It's time for all school board members in the state to talk to our politicians. And I requested some information from Mr. Sesker about the pros and cons of that. I think long-term, we should concentrate on that.
Yep.
I really think.
Yeah, I think
I
everybody
think
would
we
agree
really
with that.
should. I mean, especially when we get that list of how much money could be coming in when they're promised to fully fund it.
I want to just so I'm trying to make you guys feel a little bit better because you're making some huge decisions tonight. It's not any fault of anybody's. It's not an accounting error. It's nothing to do with anything like that. Our audits have been clean throughout the years. It's just a simple math problem where your expenditures with inflation are going faster than what the revenues are coming in. So I realize that this is difficult, but I think through the audience and everybody else, it's easy to point fingers. There's nobody to blame in this. It's the expenditures without your control are exceeding the revenues, and that's just the way it works.
I want to second Superintendent Sesker's comments. As you board members have sat here and heard, our last 2 auditors, in fact, different auditing firms, tell us we have as good of audit as you will find in all of their clients. That's 2 different audit firms, so not just the same one twice. And that's the reality of it. We also saw, better part of 6, 8, 10 weeks ago, Ehlers sit here and tell us that we have some of the lowest levy amount in the Big 9, which once again is what we compare ourselves to. So I think that's something that will certainly come up more and more. Is there any issue with having administration once again bring us a little more planning of somewhere between that 800,000, $1 million? Mr. Olson, I totally get what you're saying on this. I struggle with every coordinator on this being cut because I think they play an extremely vital role in our district, but I totally respect your thoughts as well. I mean, I get that. I just know when you look at these, tonight we spoke about the ALC center director and the online coordinator not combining, so those 2 are off the table. We talk about our workforce development coordinator, and you know, we've gotten numerous emails, our chamber's coming out in huge support of that. That's obviously vital to the 7-period day. The student success coordinator ties right back into one of our strategies, and our communications coordinator, we're going out for a levy, and that person has really helped increase our engagement with our community like we've probably never seen before. And so every one of those coordinators play an extremely vital role, I think, in what we do. Will the district proceed without any one of those? Yep, they will, right? That's the reality of it. But so I just want to comment on that a little bit as we look at this and when we get an OPEB number of what that may look like and whatnot. So other thoughts, questions, comments?
This is a fiscally responsible school district, and that's why we've been making $1 million of cuts over the last several years. Am I correct, Mr. Sesker?
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
I just think it's really important to restate what you said, and what you've said, Mr. Wolf, is that this is a responsible school district that takes its finances incredibly seriously and is doing a very good job, and that's why we have to make these cuts.
Thank you. Ms. Steves, do you have any kind of closing comments you'd like to share?
Nope. Hurts to make them all, so.
Mr. Robichaud?
I just have a request, and I kind of follow up on my original question is, could you just lay out for us what cuts we would be making it just because of decline in enrollment? I know everything is tied to decline in enrollment, but when we take a look at the elementary, where we're seeing that decline, which ones would we make just because we're not going to have the same number of students in the elementary as we have this year or projected? So you could just lay that out. Because I think those are already off the discussion, and we would make those to be fiscally responsible.
Yeah, and just to fine tooth comb that, we're graduating 300 seniors, and we have about 200 kindergartners coming in. So to rationalize a drop of 100 students is about $900,000. Exactly, Jerry. Yep.
But the students are spread throughout.
Well, no.
K through 12. I mean,
no.
fourth graders, eighth graders, right?
No, this one is seniors. Seniors, you have 300 graduating, and you have kindergartens, 200 coming in. And just that small picture is a difference of 100 kids, right? Am I doing the math right? Sorry, 100 students. Now, you're right, there are some things based on the projection where we do have some numbers going up and down. But the easiest one for me to look at as a result of budgeting is how many kindergartners are coming in. And also, by the way, high school kids are weighted 1.2, and kindergartners are 1.0. So not only are you losing 100 kids that way, but you're also losing really 120 students based on the formula that you have. So,
Mr. Olson, do you have any closing or parting comments you'd like to share?
No, I think we've covered it. I've gone through this a few times. Seems like cuts and cuts and more cuts.
Mr. Bellingham, any closing parting comments?
Probably shouldn't, but I'll just add something Mr. Olson said earlier, that this isn't 4 years on the board, Courtney and I, et cetera. This is the fourth time we've had to go through this, and it's aggravating. I said last week it's very unnerving. That's just us. At a board level, I can't imagine, and I want to thank the people who are at ground zero. We have our directors, our cabinet, who have to face these people who and tell them they're not going to have a job, each and every one of them, or their program's going to be reduced or whatever. I can't imagine what you work hard to build up these programs and the curriculum and all this, and you have to tell people we're reducing. I can't imagine being a principal or a director in a building having to tell people you're not going to be here anymore, or we have to let you go because of budget reductions because we're not here. So I want to thank you because you work with those people each and every day. You know, and what a quality staff we have built over the years here in Faribault Public Schools. And every year, as we said, we continue to lose our really, really good people. And I want to see funding come back so bad here, but I just want to thank you for what you do and for the people who are out there who service our kids each and every day with high-quality educational opportunities and engage them. I want to thank you. So thank you, everyone there, because I think that needs to be said. You know, everybody said, oh, tough being on the board, whatever. This is, my opinion, this is nothing to compare to what you have to do at ground zero as a superintendent, as curriculum, as finance people, whatever, human resources, principals. Anybody I forgot, I'm sorry, all the way down to transportation, et cetera. But thank you for what you do, and
Well said.
anything else, so thank you.
Mr. Bellingham, I think we'd all echo the sentiment, so we appreciate everybody's dedication through this tough stuff. Superintendent Sesker, just can we pull this chart up again one more time, these three columns, please? Superintendent Sesker, I think we'll set our agenda next Tuesday. It'll be posted on Wednesday, so just an effort to save some time in our meeting next Monday night. Drew, are we able to get, thank you. I'm just looking for some direction here from you, Superintendent Sesker, and also some agreement from the board, where if we look at the 800,000 column, is it fair to take that all in one action item, one swoop? I'm not hearing real issue with each specific line item in that 800,000. Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is alleviate however many there are, 10 motions and 10 roll calls and all that type of stuff. So if we're in agreement with what the leadership has presented there in 800,000, we could take that in one basket, and then anything after that, we could potentially do as a line item vote if you wanted to, or unless you want to go with each one. Mr. Olson?
I would like a line item,
You want to do a line item?
line item vote.
Okay. All right.
And
Fine with that.
if I can also suggest, just to throw this out there, and I'm not, we have to do the research with OPED first,
Yep.
but if you take the 825 plus 175, you're at $1 million. If we
What's
can
the
use
175 of
170
OPEB?
of OPEB.
But we don't know if that's
We'll-
for sure yet.
No,
Yep.
we don't.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, that helps us. I appreciate it. So with that, anything, board members, any other comments or questions? Superintendent Sesker, any other comments or questions?
No, just thanks for hanging in there, you guys. This is a grueling process. February is always the worst month for superintendents every single year. I think out of my 23 years as a superintendent, I can count on one hand the number of years I did not have to make a reduction, and that's in 3 different school districts. So it says something about the inflation and not the formula not being able to keep up with what our expenses are. So, but thank you very much. Thank you guys very much for all of your work that you're doing through this process.
It's likely the year after a levy passes.
Yeah, it is. In fact, the 2 years after that levy in 13 passed, we didn't have to make one cut. And finally, thanks again to our cabinet who's put this together. It's taken a lot. And you're right, John, there are some really, really difficult conversations. So, thank you.
Okay, with that, we don't need we don't need a motion to adjourn. We're done for the evening, so thank